Hello, 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 everyone. Welcome, welcome, welcome. It's good to see you again, and I already see perhaps some new faces that I've never seen before, but I just saw on my screen my old neighbor, Tiffany. It's still every day. Sometimes my children just go and they stand in the front yard and they look over at what used to be Tiffany's house and they go, "Remember when Miss Tiffany lived there?" And then they just cry from their soul. We were literally at Starbucks the other day and her friend was like, "Let's get one of those cake pops." And Taylor goes, "I don't eat cake pops anymore since my neighbor moved." Ruined these small humans. No guilt, no guilt, no guilt. Welcome, everybody. We are going to get started in just a few moments. My name is Lindsay T.H. Jackson, and I have the great pleasure of being your host in today's Unlearning session, where we are going to be unlearning anti-trans misinformation. We are still helping to help one of our panelists find their way through the multiverse into this space. Are they here now?
Yeah,
Yay, we did it. Yes, because I just saw the second Spider-Man movie and it's hard moving through the multiverse. I don't want to give it away, but I hope you all have plans to go see it. It's amazing. And then we can come back and say which character, which of the Spider-Men would I be? Just saying, Issa Rae's character, but whatever. That's not a spoiler. Just check it out. But clearly, I'm the pregnant Black woman who's just messing up things across the universe. Obviously, typecast. Okay. So, welcome to Unlearning Anti-Trans Misinformation. Let us begin with our housekeeping, as we always do. If you go down to the bottom of your Zoom screen, there should be something that says CC for closed captions. You can turn on closed captions if that would improve your experience of our time together. You can also change the language that those captions are running in. So feel free to try that out as we keep going in our time together today. Live ASL interpretation is provided as always by Pro Bono ASL. Today we have Junie Cassaway and Victor running our live ASL interpretation. We are so happy that they are here to co-host with me as always. If you haven't read our community guidelines, we do encourage you to do so before you enter into this space today. Just a reminder that while we are in a space of unlearning together, that we provide grace to ourselves. We are okay with not knowing and moving to a state of increased knowledge. That requires empathy with ourselves, a desire to learn, to grow, to expand, to be creative together. But that also means to apply grace to ourselves, we have to offer it to others. So we're also going to support others on their learning journey as we all advance on our anti-oppression journey. Today's session will be recorded. We have so many people that look for the recording after each session in order for them to engage with this community. Only those that are spotlighted are going to be in that recording. So that's not an excuse to be like, oh no, now I'm going to go off a recording. No, we want to look at you. We want to pretend we're in a live room together, all smelling each other's armpits or something. So unless you come up onto screen and you ask a question, you are not going to be on that recording. If you do come up on the screen and ask a question when we get to Q&A, you will make yourself YouTube famous. We invite you to reflect with us afterwards. We are constantly learning and growing and developing based on your feedback. I love reading the comments that come through, especially when you send me ones like, "I'm not sure you should wear that color anymore." Thank you. That's why I didn't wear it today. But reflection afterwards, please take those moments and give us that feedback so that we can continue to expand our community. ASL interpretation is provided by Pro Bono ASL. They are amazing partners making the revolution accessible. Oh, I love saying that. I'm gonna get that as a tattoo on my back. As I said, our partners today are Junie Cassaway and Victor. Feel free to reach out with them afterwards on LinkedIn and really plug these services. If you are looking to up level, your access within your Zoom meetings or any event, definitely Pro Bono ASL is the partner that we would suggest. What do we do? What do we do here, Laura, at LTHJ Global? One, we believe that diversity is the norm, not the exception. So we're always surprised when people are like, what? There's diversity here? No, you don't say. Yes, I do say. Diversity is always present. Take a look at this beautiful Zoom room right now. Look at all this diversity. Oh, I'm just like, oh, I love it. We do strategic DEI consulting, workplace learning and development, executive coaching, full suite DEI and inclusive organizational design function. Basically everything that you need to take your DEI work from stuck talking about it to action. We also enforce all of that with our new Sojourn DEI tech platform, which provides clear step-by-step DEI plans and work paths, strategic plans and task tracking, essential compliance and accountability markers, guidance from our DEI transformation team, which is spread out around the country. And then what we're so excited about is that Sojourn makes DEI services and support much more affordable for our small and mid-sized organizations. So if you haven't checked that out, we encourage you to go to sojourndei.com and reach out and request a demo. Upcoming live workshops outside of Unlearning. We have our next Why Do Well-Meaning People Do Harm live workshop on Monday, June 12th, and our next Trans Identity 101 live workshop with Joy on Friday, June 9th. So if you are continuing your education after today, you're like, there's so many words that the panelists said that I do not know. I really encourage you to go to Friday's workshop. And if you are early on your anti-oppression journey or in the middle, or you think you're at the end, I invite you to come join me at our Why Do Well-Meaning People Do Harm workshop on Monday. There we go. As always, let's start the way that we want to end. Let's take a deep breath together so that we can fully enter into this space. I know we're all coming from so many different places. Why? I always sing that song. It's just like, Dixie, wide open places you need. Okay, let's take a deep breath. Inhaling in and exhaling out. Coming fully into our bodies, our hearts, and our minds. Closing our email. Yep, I gave you time to do that. Let's enter in. Oh my goodness, look at this panel. As we start talking about unlearning anti-trans misinformation, some of these are celebrities that you've already seen on our virtual couch before, but let's learn a little bit more about them. River Teslar returning to the virtual couch. River is the business training specialist at GSBA and is a respected leader in creating a more inclusive work environment. River regularly helps people relate, respectfully with trans candidates, employees, clients, and supporters. As a trans woman with a background in advocacy and community work, she puts her many skills to use for the GSBA, Washington State's LGBTQI+ and Allied Chamber of Commerce. A consummate food enthusiast, she spends her free time finding new restaurants and cooking with her partner, as well as performing at open mics. I didn't know that. Can we get like a set list for those open mics, River? Hopping between her favorite local haunts and enjoying walks around the beautiful East Capitol Hill neighborhood of Seattle. Welcome, River, to the virtual couch, everybody. Give her some love. Thank you. Dr. Marcy Bowers, we helped Dr. Marcy find her way through the virtual schmuzzle to be here with us, the renowned gender-affirming surgeon with more than 33 years experience who has performed groundbreaking surgeries. Marcy has been featured on Oprah, CBS Sunday Morning, Discovery Health, TLC's I Am Jazz, and the New York Times. I was just happy when I was like, she's been on Oprah. In my mind, I was like, she was just on Oprah. And then she decided to come do this next. Totally made sense in my head. Marcy's like, no. Marcy is the first surgeon with transgender history and first woman to perform gender-affirming genital surgeries worldwide. She's also the WPATH President, World Professional Association for Transgender Health, and currently serves on the Trevor Project Board of Directors, having served previous terms with GLAAD and the Transgender Law Center. Her Marcy Foundation, get that link, put it up in your browser now, is on a mission to end the practice female genital mutilation, cutting worldwide by providing free surgical care and education for clitoral restoration surgery. I want to invite everybody that just heard those terms, even heard the word clitoris and was like, oh, I'm having a reaction. Wade through that reaction so that we can focus on the work that needs to be done in this space. Welcome, Dr. Marcy, to the virtual couch. Let's give Dr. Marcy some love.
Yay.
And let's meet Reverend David Chattel. Reverend David Chattel, who's given me permission today to refer to him as David, is an Episcopal priest, mystic, communicator, and all-around creative who feels most at home in the liminal space between the institution and the wilderness. He enjoys finding and using words that draw diverse people into similar spaces where they discover deep connections. He's been featured by the Human Rights Campaign for his advocacy against anti-trans legislation. Embracing the Christian tradition, David also draws influence and inspiration from Buddhist, Taoist, and Hindu philosophies. He's passionate about helping others cultivate a meditative practice that roots them in a lived experience of acceptance and belovedness in the present moment. David makes his home in the deep southern US along the Gulf Coast of Alabama, where he enjoys making music, cooking, sipping Irish whiskey, and spending time with family friends. David, there's like 3, 4, 5, 10 things that so many people in this room are already reading this and they're like, those seem like those should not go together, right? And you are just living this reject your bias life. Everybody welcome David to the virtual couch. Let us, oh, okay, who am I? My name is Lindsay T.H. Jackson. They call me America's DEI teacher. I'm the founder and lead executive at LTHJ Global and Sojourn. I'm a social scientist, researcher, author, poet, and speaker, and I have the great pleasure of being the host of Unlearning with Lindsay T.H. Jackson. Welcome, everybody. We do not have a moment to spare. We gotta, okay, can we, where do we even want to start? River. Okay, I mean, so we're living this moment collectively, and I'm imagining that, like me, some people are in this room because maybe they want to continue their education, their personal development and growth in this area. Maybe they're watching legislation be passed around them, record levels of legislation targeting trans individuals in the United States of America, if we just stay in this context for a moment. Let's start with some definitions. What does trans mean? What does transsexual mean? What, you know, some of us grew up with, there are words that we do not use anymore to describe a trans identity, and we're still grappling with that. Can we just start with a scientific definition of this language that we see thrown around all the time?
Sure, yeah, this is River. So I think when we think about language as this holistic thing, the very first thing that we have to internalize is that it is inherently incredibly elastic, right? We all know this. The words that we use to define ourselves and the words around us shift so broadly over time. You'll see a lot of people that are my age or younger, and a lot of folks older than me are now using queer as a moniker to define the identity when that used to be a term that was used as disparaging. As far as like scientific definition of transgender or transsexual, transgender kind of boils down pretty easily, right? Because it comes from this Latin root where cisgender, a lot of people have said like, oh, that kind of feels like a slur to me, but it comes from the Latin root cis, meaning on the same side of, so cisgender, so you relate to your gender assigned at birth, and trans means on the other side of, or so you don't relate with your gender assigned at birth. This actually comes from like cislunar and translunar, which I really love. Transsexual is a word that you will see used less and less in the community, but there's still a ton of people that heavily relate with that word and see it as a way to kind of like holistically define themselves. And some folks delineate that as like, oh, I am trying to align my gender as best as I can with the sex that I see myself aligning as. And some people just like the way that it rolls off the tongue a little bit better. So I think when we are learning definitions and internalizing definitions, it's important to know that it's a growing experience for all of us. So my answer to that question may not be exactly the same as another trans community member's answer to that question, and that's totally okay.
Wait a second. You don't represent everybody?
Yeah, I know. It's a wild concept. Trans people continue to not be a monolith. As much as I wish I could be the voice of every trans person out there, I think a lot of people wouldn't be too thrilled about that.
I'm cracking up. Amber in the comments just said, what are we even doing here then? Yes. Marcy, maybe can you add on to this? Because, you know, we hear River, who is bringing all of this research, all of this, I mean, many years of research and practice in this space to this. But then we have this rhetoric going around that says, well, that's not medical. That is not actual science. And as a doctor, Marcy, Dr. Marcy, can you talk to us about that? Or should I say Dr. Marcy or Dr. Bowers? What is your...
Either one, either is great. Either is great.
Yeah. Dr. Bowers, can you talk to us? Can you expand on what River already said and help us understand what is the medical profession saying about this?
Well, the medical profession is, I'll say, mildly supportive, but doesn't really understand a trans identity, I'd say, if you want to describe the medical profession as a monolith. You know, there is support. There are people that are well-meaning and they try to be PC, politically correct, as regards to inclusion, but it's walking the walk and talking the talk. And so those of us who experience gender diverse thinking and identity, we understand that it's not just one thing as described before. Trans, you know, and the detractors that we face try to paint this as non-biological. And I, in my interviews, always say exactly the exact opposite. This is a biological example of natural diversity. Transgender is diversity. It is absolutely diversity. Gender tends to cluster in the binaries. Most people tend to be, I mean, after all, we're pronounced boy or girl at birth. And that's it. That's all. That's the only choice at the time. But the fact is, at birth, even the genitalia are represented by diversity. There are conditions. I was at a conference in Killarney, Ireland, about a month ago, and I got into a discussion with someone who was he seemed to whatever he was interested in talking to me. But pointed to someone who was trans. It was a conference. It was EPATH, so we were talking about trans individual. He apparently decided she was not feminine enough for him, so he made a derogatory comment. And then I proceeded to go into a little bit of factual finding and explain to him that yes, there are actually babies born that have a penis that has two X chromosomes. That is a biological fact. That's nature. There is an example where every rule in nature has an exception. And also that you can have an individual born with a female vulva and have a Y chromosome. So 46XY, be by so-called biologically male from a chromosomal standpoint. But you see, there's more than a dozen different ways to measure sex biologically. There's chemical sex, there's chromosomal sex, there's anatomical sex, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And every single one of those rules that we put out, there are exceptions. So what's happened is society has been blindfolded into thinking and duped and fed a very narrowly conscripted message from I mean, it's our own upbringing. I guess it was just society sorting things out. I'll take the benign view rather than some sort of conspiracy theory that this is really just a white nationalist Christian attempt to put us all in boxes again. But to define people in just as just one or the other is simply not true in the genitals, and it's even less so where it comes to the idea of gender identity. But once again, most of and young people really get this idea. Young people, the new generation gets it. They've got trans friends, they've got non-binary friends. They're very comfortable with the language. They use they, them pronouns like stepping out of bed. It's just not as radical to us as I mean, to me, I'm an old soul, so I find it more difficult than young people, and it doesn't affect their personal identity. It's not like some sort of contagion that they're suddenly going to get the itch to cross into the middle. They're just reflecting the reality that for that individual who they like and support because they're friends, they happen to have a diverse sense of gender identity. So that's my long-winded way to explain. This is all very natural. This doesn't mean the end of male and female. It doesn't mean the end of reproduction. It doesn't mean that there's, that babies are going to be, only given yellow and green outfits at birth, because most of us do cluster within the binary. But it also makes sense biologically that there is a whole spectrum from A to Z, from male to female, that connects us all, and where we fit in. That's been the elusiveness of history, and that finally this generation we're beginning to address it and respect it and step forward. So I'm just optimistic, but it is biological. It is a natural force that can no longer be conscripted by religious authority and in a narrow definition of a narrow binary definition.
This is Lindsay. Session's over. I think we did our job here. Have a great Wednesday, everybody, and let's all get a lemonade. What? Dr. Bowers, I see everybody in the chat dropping all the nuggets that you just gave to us, so I won't even try to reiterate all of them. But I think this is what I see in my research and in my historical reflection as well. And please, I know, River, you study a lot of this too. It really is only in the past kind of 200-300 years that we start to see this obsession with this rejection of things outside this binary within gender definition and identities, remembering that across many cultures, this idea of a binary gender identity being so fixed is not the norm. Can you speak to us a little bit, River, about what was going on historically? I mean, I think I speak to a lot of people and they seem to think that we always had laws on the book that were targeted at the LGBTQIA community, at the trans community, and they forget that these are actually new laws that were written, some only 100 years ago. If we're lucky, somebody on this call, that means it was in their lifetime, right? Can you talk about some of that history just to bring us up to the present?
Yeah, this is River. Absolutely, I'd love to speak to that. You know, the training that I give the most often is my like LGBTQ plus 101 training. And one of the like third or fourth slides in there is like a little like pop quiz thing. And it talks about Albert Cashier, who was like a Civil War soldier, and he was a trans man, and he was like went to war and like dressed as a man to be able to participate, and then after the war ended continued and was like, you know what, I really vibe with this is really like hitting me in a spot that feels really good for my identity. And I have that in there to kind of demonstrate that like gender diverse people have been around forever, right? And just like you said, like it's been fairly recent, not for us in our lifetime, but certainly recent as far as like the history of the entire earth goes, that we have been trying to put people into these like rigid little boxes and punishing people that come outside of it. And that kind of like hits right in that like there's a word that goes around both in the community and outside the community where people say transgender, because they say, oh, well, people are just transitioning because it's so popular now. And we're just seeing so many more trans people than we used to. And the thing that I always point to is there's this really handy little graph of like instances of people reporting that they were left-handed over time. And you see it spike immediately when we stop punishing people for being left-handed, right? So it's the same within like gender diverse communities as far as like the social barometer shifts goes. Like the more we see community being like more positive about trans and gender diverse identities, the more we see people feeling safe in coming out, right? So we've always been around, we always will be around, but yeah, it's only recently. And you know, I consider myself to be kind of radically optimistic, and looking at the slate of legislation that we have been going through is actively discouraging. But I do like to like gently remind myself that it is, you know, it is always going to get worse before it gets better. And the people that I talk to in my community really believe and love, and like the state of edification among like the general populace on trans identities is at a much higher rate than it has ever been. And that feels amazing. But obviously that's a double-edged sword, because now we are like the current hot button political issue. And you know, I think this current election cycle coming up, we're going to see a lot of really hateful things in the media. And I think it's very important to be gentle with ourselves and to remind ourselves that this is a winning battle. And I do think that we are continuing to make strides.
Wow, this is Lindsay. Father David, somebody on this call is going, wait a second, you can't be on a panel about anti-trans misinformation and be, you know, spiritual, religious, and be from the South. You know, next you're going to tell us you're from Florida originally. Like what, make it make sense to us. No, Christianity and everything about the LGBTQIA plus community are in conflict, right?
Thankfully, no. I think in a practical manner of speaking, if you're going to look, as you said a few minutes ago, at the last 300 years of religious practice, particularly in the Judeo-Christian sphere, then it is very easy and very correct to say that that Christianity has embraced discriminatory and extremely inequitable positions and practice. Not just in relating to LGBTQ plus community, but in nearly every opportunity that there has been to see those who are in the majority and in power make sure that they stay there. So unfortunately, religious practice, which in my opinion, is designed to deepen spirituality, has been conscripted in so many different situations, not just in Christian situations, but across the board. Religious practice so often descends into this sort of conscripted moral police state that becomes about deciding who is worth considering that they are human. And when we take religious practice and we place it as a gatekeeping device to decide who should be treated as a human, it becomes antithetical to the very thing that it was designed to be in the first place. And I like to talk more about cultivation of spirituality than I do about religious practice. I love what Ram Dass says about religion. Religion is a tool. It is a path. But if in the end you don't learn to jettison the path, it becomes a trap. And that religion can be a trap. But what is underneath that is spirituality, and spirituality is the birthright of every human being. Spirituality is the birthright of every human being. We are spiritual beings that are having a human experience. And so when I think about how I think the majority of the population interacts with, particularly the Christian sphere, I think they have every reason to do it. But personally, I really feel as though my path has been adulterated and conscripted and made into something that is elitist and used for abuse. And part of why I am who I am and why I do what I do is because I had to make a decision a long time ago. Was I going to leave this thing that was so precious to me, or was I going to become an agent of change from the inside? And that's an important distinction, I think, because we look at religion as a pillar unto itself and not as something that serves humanity. And to the degree that we can be almost the writers of our story, we can interact with religious practice, with ritual, with sacred things together in corporate functions and corporate opportunities, and have it be affirming and celebrating and wide open, and realizing that that it is a path. And if we don't treat it like a path and learn to rise above it, then every time we do that, whether we reset it or say that we've rolled back the wrong things that we've done religiously or not, it's always going to progress and become the people in power putting under their thumbs the people who are not.
Oh, this is Lindsay. You, Father David, and I will have to get together, because I always say when I step down as CEO or they kick me out of LTHJ Global, I'm going to spend the next 10 years after this reclaiming my religion, to be less about Christianity, the religion, and being more about being Christ-like, which the day Christianity becomes Christ-like, woof, what a day that will be. Let's define, what is this misinformation that the three of you are commonly seeing? River, Father David, Dr. Bowers, what is it what are the stories, the myths that you see going around? I think we already kind of covered one around this idea that gender is biologically binary. There's only male or female, and we're demystifying that one. What are some of the other main ones that you see? Dr. Bowers?
Well, the biological origins of gender diversity are important. A big part of helping people understand that they've been basically lied to societally. But the other is that this idea of identity cannot be established until a person reaches adulthood. So we see a lot of the anti-trans bills directed protecting our children with the idea that neither the children nor their parents nor their professional psychologists, physicians can make decisions about their identity. Let's just start with the children and the veracity and the tenaciousness of their identities are routinely underestimated until you meet a trans child. And this is one of the things I've said, that if we're going to turn around this train or this cruise boat or whatever we're on, in the sense of the direction that the anti-trans bills have taken us, we've got to do so with personal stories. We've got to make these legislators and politicians and lawyers feel the pain that is incurred by being denied access to one's true self. The fact is that the vast majority of individuals understand and come to terms with their gender identities at a very early age. And it whether it's 4, 5, or 6 years old, it tends to be about that time. Another critical time is around the time of puberty. And those are the two moments where sometimes gender is really not enforced as a pre-adolescent, and so it's the effects of puberty that become toxic and noxious to someone, and that's the secondary blip of individuals who really find that their anatomy does not match their gender identity. So I guess I'll leave it at that. That's an important concept, that gender identity is established early, and that it's that although it can change with time, it tends to remain fixed. You have to, treating gender diversity is tricky because everyone is an individual and no story is the same. But I do think that it's important to double down on this idea that gender identity can in fact be established early. The second is that there are the hordes of people regretting their decision, stopping their hormone treatments, detransitioning, retransitioning, whatever you want to call it, ending care, and that fact has been obscured by people holding up examples of Chloe Cole and others, Kira Bell in the UK. There are a number of high-profile. I was part of a 60 Minutes piece where there was a woman who claimed that she had been misdiagnosed and had her top surgery, her breasts removed after just one visit. So these horrific stories of being people misdiagnosed, or that they would have somehow a change of heart and want to return to their assigned gender. While they are important to be sensitive to, these are very rare examples, and I don't care what study you look at, they are very low, usually less than 1%. The other medical example is to look at even the knee surgery or any other orthopedic surgery, or especially plastic surgery, where rates of regret are much higher than they are for trans treatment. Actually, what's astounding with all of the discrimination and the anti-trans sentiment that's out there, although I do agree it is getting better. I absolutely agree with River. The world is better, and we're going to win this fight. But still, it is. You would think that more people would turn back. And in fact, actually, if you look at the detransitioners, Jack Turbin did a study just a year or so back where nearly 70% of those who decided to discontinue their treatment, either hormones or surgery or whatever, they did so because of pressure from outside influences like parents or employers,
or even finances.
Or there's lots of reasons why people would stop their treatment. But many of these go on, they come back to it later on. It doesn't mean that they're done, doesn't mean that the diagnosis is wrong. And that's the important thing, is that using examples of detransition is a false, it's a false flag. It's a false proposition to try to paint the entire field with that. It's like saying that, just because someone in a Tesla ran a red light and hit another car, that we take all the cars off the road. That just doesn't make any sense.
This is Lindsay.
So I'll just leave those 2 points to start with.
I'm just wondering too, this is Lindsay, if because I don't read everything, I'm not across everything. And so maybe one of you can tell me, have you seen similar push for legislation for men who later regret their vasectomy and then want to have a reverse vasectomy, that we now are working to outlaw vasectomies?
Exactly.
Has anybody read that? No. Why is it that we seem to be okay with legislating women's bodies, and particularly what's happening in the room with their doctors, trans bodies? Why are we not? Are there any instances where we are similarly making sure that cis men are not having access to what they want to have happen inside their medical relationship? I don't know, Dr. Bauer, because you have way more.
No, I mean, 20% of people regret knee surgery, and yet we don't eliminate knee surgery for those who need it. I mean, it's a false equivalency. It's what we call medical exceptionalism, where we're singling out trans care and using rare examples of regret or treatment shortcomings, not to understand the shortcomings themselves, or to reach out and to be supportive of the people who would, be so fragile that they change their mind, or indecisive, or whatever their reasons, or have pressure. Not to understand those people, not to make the diagnostic criteria better, but rather to just eliminate care for everyone. So medical exceptionalism, just it's unconscionable that it's used in this way.
Yes, this is Lindsay. Father David, can you speak around what are some of the misconceptions? And I think you alluded to it already, but what are some of the misconceptions that we have about practicing our spirituality or our religion, and also being actively campaigning against misinformation, campaigning for equal rights, for anti-racism, for anti-blackness, for supporting the LGBTQIA community? Can you speak to that?
Yeah, this is David. That's a huge question, because I feel like it's so loaded when we think about particularly the Christian church and the way that it presents itself, particularly in the first world cultures, and also really in second, third world cultures. What I think that we see most often is that the church and religion becomes this clearinghouse of moral policing, and interestingly enough, that clearinghouse of moral policing almost becomes this way of understanding how to approach your faith, and it's kind of a it's kind of a way to bring about an opportunity to be able to point at a certain group of people and say, you have it wrong. And because you have it wrong, then I must have it right. And so there's a lot of fear that promotes that kind of behavior and that kind of rhetoric. When I look at the misinformation that I most often encounter in parishes and among people in the Christian denominations, the Christian religion, is that it is just simply not possible to be X and also be a Christian. Whatever X is, whether it's a member of the LGBTQ plus community or what have you. And so the basis for that always goes back to this idea of some moral equivalency to participation in a relationship with divinity. But lately, what I've really been harping on and considering for even for myself is that if you ask yourself how long the Judeo-Christian tradition has been in existence, I mean, at most 6,000 years. We have, anthropologically speaking, 300,000 years of modern human history, throughout which there has been spiritual activity and religious activity, sacred activity that humankind has been a part of. And so if we're going to look at something that, even though it's my tradition and it's precious to me, if I'm going to look at it and say, this is somehow something that we have come up with literally yesterday, anthropologically and historically speaking, and we're going to say this is the only way to understand how to be spiritual and religious, we've just taken ourselves out of the discussion for the majority of humanity to even be halfway be considered serious at all. It's just a farce. And so there has to be another way of seeing that. There has to be a way of combating the misinformation that finds its way into being equated with being spiritual, being Christian, being whatever you are. It becomes this thing that you have to begin to agree with or see as true in order to be a part of the group that you are a part of. Then you get launched into this idea of subjective truth versus objective truth, and that is a big deal for a lot of religious communities because they start harping on subjective truth being these things that are true no matter what, beyond the shadow of a doubt of opinion. But once you start going down that road, then you have to consider, what part of human rights are not subjective truth. I mean, it is just, if you're going to say that all humans deserve these certain rights, where are you going to draw that line? And how are you going to draw that line? How are you going to decide who gets to do this and who doesn't get to do this, and who gets afforded dignity, who gets afforded peace and justice, and who gets afforded, affirming healthcare? How are you going to make those determinations if you agree that that all people deserve human rights? And so I think that's the misinformation that I see the most is somehow we have decided that it is okay to consider that a certain segment of the population that disagrees with us morally is now not deserving of human dignity and human rights. And to me, that is a denial of the root of what it means to be spiritually connected to yourself, to God, to everybody else. So those are the misinformation points that I really try to aim at and isolate and identify and have conversations with people about. Just sitting down and talking is important.
This is Lindsay. Somebody needed to hear that today. Somebody needed to know that irregardless of who they are, how they identify, that it is not another person's right to take away their faith, their practice, their spiritual journey. River, do you think that there's some element of we like binary thinking because opening ourselves up to the reality, the very natural aspect of the complexities of the human existence is hard. It's like, Lens, I got to remember to like get my matcha. I had to remember like where the clean underwear was. I had to get the kids to school, and then I had to do 40 hours at work, and I had to remember to eat well and blah, blah, blah. I don't have time to think complex thoughts. I like binary thinking because it makes things very easy. Black, white, done.
Yeah, this is River. I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head a little bit. I think that looking at new things and exploring new concepts is like daunting. But like I'm a big horror fan, and I don't think that like learning things is this huge like Lovecraftian must not gaze directly at experience, right? And sometimes we have to do the hard thing and challenge our own inherent biases. This is something I talk about a lot in my trainings whenever I'm given the opportunity, is that like part of confronting your own inherent biases, right? Because we all have like a code of ethics that we live by, and we all want to be the like most optimized, perfect, like nicest version of ourselves. It is such a human thing to think something mean about somebody. And then what do you do when you think that mean thing, right? Does your face get a little bit flushed and then you shove that in a box and you don't look directly at it? But it's really important when you want to grow and when you want to change to look directly at these hard things and go like, why did I think that? Or why did I interpret that this way? And I think that if more people moved through the world with this like really nice empathetic lens, that then we wouldn't have to have all these panels and we wouldn't have to push back against all of this legislation if every single person went into every single human encounter thinking like, what makes this person tick? And is this person operating in bad faith, right? And I think that that's one of the larger like pillars of misinformation that we see when we see legislation like pushed against us, is that like most people are fighting a version of trans people that just doesn't exist by and large, right? We're fighting these battles for this like mystical boogeyman of a person who has transitioned only to go into women's restrooms to harass people, when we see cisgender people harassing people in bathrooms much more often than that, right? And I think as far as misinformation goes, my like biggest call to action for like societal like knowledge in general is to learn to look at statistics and interpret them for yourself, right? Because we will see so many statistics like kind of pressed across the table in such a bad faith way. The big one I think everybody has heard is like, oh, 40% of trans people attempt suicide or attempt self-harm. And then people will use that and go, why would you ever transition if you're going to join that 40% when you're not really taking in the bigger picture and going, okay, well, what is the societal pressure that trans people are facing that is making them like more prone to mental illness and disparity, right? As we see the social barometer shift, we see mental well-being of trans people get higher and higher and higher. Studies show that trans people with a supportive family and a supportive community have like a much better like medical outcome. I think it's something like 94% of people who get gender affirming surgery like are really, really psyched about it, and they see need for mental health care go down 8% every single year after that surgery. So like, it's really important to expose yourself to a lot of statistics that you are seeing on both sides, look at that data, interpret it as holistically as you can, and the big thing is not confusing correlation and causation, right? If you see that 40% statistic, don't go 40% of trans people feel terrible all the time. Why would you ever want to be trans? Ask yourself, well, why does that 40% statistic exist? And I think that's what I would say on the misinformation side of things.
This is Lindsay. Just quickly, River, can you unpack that correlation and causation? Help somebody understand what you're meaning when you're looking at the data.
Yeah, so it means that just because you see a number that says something, it doesn't necessarily mean what you would interpret it as on first blush, right? So when you see that 40% of trans people have attempted self-harm, that doesn't mean that if you transition, then you will attempt to self-harm, right? So it really means to unpack that data, get a little closer look at it, and interpret it for yourself.
Yes, this is Lindsay. I would also add on to that, one of the first things that you can do is look at who funded the research and really understand who conducted the research, because not all research should be treated equally. Yes. Dr. Bowers.
Oh,
Oh,
I'm
go ahead.
sorry. Go ahead. I was
No,
just
go.
going to add to what River said, though, too. And if you think about it, this is what we do in times of war. You know, it's very difficult if you tell your soldiers that, you know, the person the force you're fighting, you know, they have feelings and emotions, they have children, you want to see them as you are good and they are evil. And you're fighting an evil force. I mean, so this is, in a way, this is what the conservative movement has done for trans people. It's like they're coming for you in the bathrooms. They're emotionally unstable. The treatments are dangerous. You know, they paint it black and white as though it's and they use that to scare people from supporting the care at all. Or yeah, and same thing with bullies. When you're bullied, you notice that people step away. It must be the bully's fault somehow. And anyway, very good discussion.
I want to open it up now. This is Lindsay for some questions from our audience. What's coming up for you? I'll open the chat window, and if you want to funnel them through Laura Kay, or if you'd like to raise your hand and come up onto the virtual stage, let us hear from you. Let us be in community together. I also want to invite you again to remember, you do not have to give the appearance of knowing. Fight that dominant cultural norm to always have to give the appearance of knowing. What do you want to know so that you can go back into your other communities and dispel misinformation? What are you struggling with that by you understanding more, you can go further this work? And from Rosie in chat, or Courtney, you go ahead. Thank you. Welcome, Courtney.
Hi. Yes, I'll ask a question that I have thought about. Others ask me. I'm just going to ask it, you know, without knowing. Why would someone who's trans, why would they want to transition medically? If the gender has nothing to do with our biology, why wouldn't they just perform their gender?
Thank you.
And, you know, to answer it quickly, yes, some do that. Some, you know, some do. Some go back and forth. Some retain their, you know, there's lots of ways to express gender. Lots of ways to express that feeling that you know, that all men have estrogen and all women have testosterone. What a surprise that is to conservatives. But you can, you know, we all feel it. You know, there are times. So do you go, but to feel more aligned with the gender that you feel, that's where the medical intervention comes in. When if you're going masculine, to have more muscle feeling, to have more whatever, you know, the positives that testosterone bring. Some call it emotional stability. Some say that estrogen does the same thing if you're going towards the feminine direction. But it aligns you more closely to what you're feeling internally.
Yeah, I would love to, this is River, jump in and kind of add to that. You know, just like Dr. Bowers was saying, there are a ton of people that choose to transition but don't do so medically. But there is also this huge layer of societal stigma, right? Where I am more likely to be validated culturally as my gender because I have taken these steps, right? Because I have pursued FFS, or because, let's say, I am taking HRT and I am more inclined to pass in places where it might not be safe for me to be visibly trans. So there's a wealth of reasons that many people do it. I personally just wanted to look in the mirror and feel more closely aligned with myself. So medical transition felt great for me in that way. I think part of the human experience, and it's kind of like getting a tattoo and then your artist messes up like a tiny piece of line work, and everyone around you isn't going to see that little scratched line, but you're going to see it every single time you look at that tattoo, right? And you're going to know it's there. So to get your head in this like nice, cool, right place, it can be really helpful for a lot of people. I can say like anecdotally, it was incredibly helpful for me to medically transition and pursue the things that I have done. I did, to share a personal anecdote that's been pretty wild. I haven't done voice therapy. I quite like my voice. I'm a singer, right? So I was a vocal performance major in college. And I perform at a lot of open mics and stuff like that. But I did get facial feminization surgery, and I noticed that instances of me getting misgendered went down radically. It's interesting because I'm in Seattle now. There's a ton of trans people, and most people in Seattle are much more exposed to trans people. They see me, they hear me, they're like, "Oh, that's a trans woman," right? But I went to New Orleans on vacation like just last week, and it was the strangest thing, right? I didn't get misgendered a single time in the South. It's the first time I had been to the South since transitioning. And it made me very, very happy with the decisions that I had made to align myself with the gender that I identify the most with. So I hope that that's a helpful answer to that question.
Thank you, Courtney. Thank you, Dr. Bowers. Thank you, River. Rosie said, I'd love to hear the panel's response to sporting associations that have banned trans women from competing in women's sports, citing unfair biological advantage. A recent example of this is in British cycling.
Yeah, I think Dr. Bowers will be definitely more uniquely qualified than me to answer on this. But I will say that studies have shown that like hormone level is very much the same. You know, we can talk about build difference and stuff like that. The kind of hot take thing that I always share is, aren't we like actively looking for people that have biological advantages in sports, right? Are we going to ban Michael Phelps for being way too good at everything? Are we going to ban all of our Olympic athletes because they're way too sick at doing the long jump, right? If somebody's breaking every single record, do we then kick them out? I think gender delineation is interesting. Dr. Bowers will probably be able to speak a lot more to the biological component to it, but that's kind of my controversial, like put that across the table thing that I always think of when the women's sports debate thing comes up. There was very recently a skateboarding competition, a women's skateboarding competition that a trans woman won. And somebody made like a huge fuss about it. And like skateboarding is not something that you're inherently advantaged at because you've got a little bit more muscle mass, right? So a lot of it is kind of just outrage farming, and it's really interesting to see.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Absolutely, River. You know, in terms of muscle mass, boys and girls are absolutely the same until the onset of puberty. So, and then the aspect of sport is also relevant in that there are sports that require muscle mass, and that would give you an advantage. And there are clearly a lot of sports where it is finesse and your training and your agility and some of the inherent athleticism that individuals have that probably are more important. So golf is a good example. Actually, tennis is a good example where because the effects of hormones are quite equalizing. After several years, it depends, but generally, if a male-bodied person goes on estrogens, their muscle mass is going to reduce. And I think any trans woman can tell you that, where, I used to be able to open a can of tomato sauce without using a little device, and now that is a hopeless thing. So it's just something that that comes with the territory. So that alone tends to be a very much an equalizing factor. But I think that something where basketball, clearly someone that is 6'10", if they decide to transition, they would have an advantage. And I'm going to be writing my second opinion piece for the New York Times coming up. So I hope you saw the first one in April 1st. If you didn't, you can easily have a look at that. But this one will be on trans participation in athletics. And I somehow have found myself to be a voice of moderation, because I look at it. I have two girls who are both active in sports. I've participated. I was actually denied a trophy for winning the women's golf championship a few years ago, when I actually knew how to play golf, which I somehow have lost the ability to. But it was in a small, my little town of Trinidad. But the point being, we want the playing field to be level, and so there we probably have to find a middle road. But remember, the IOC went through all of this hand wringing and pearl clutching back in the 1980s, when it was clear that East German women were being doped. They were being given testosterone to build their muscle mass. So an exogenous hormone added to obviously give them a competitive advantage. And so that's when they began testing athletes, especially female athletes. And they found, in whatever the year was, 1988, I believe it was, they found that 11 of the female athletes competing that year had Y chromosomes. Incredible. So this is why in 2004, they allowed trans women and presumably trans men to compete in Olympics. And actually, what is remarkable is that there is, even though trans women the trans population is 0.6% of the population, far fewer than that are represented on the Olympic podium. So, there's there's a lot of fear mongering. We see the very skilled athlete, like you said, somebody wins a skateboard race and it's because they were transgender. Not because they're more agile, had better foot skills, and they've been doing it since they were 3 years old. So, but in a sport like swimming, in a sport like basketball, perhaps we come up with a handicap system. But the importance of participation, especially for high school athletes in competitive sports, is really important, because it's not even just about, and most of those athletes are never going to be Olympic athletes, but it's about what sport is good for. And it is good for socialization. It's great for team building. It's great for networking, and that holds throughout life. So I think eventually, I hope eventually that these exclusions for trans participation in sports are going to be ruled unconstitutional. I really do believe they are. It is a constitutional right, and they're by denying that basic right, they're denying them that opportunity. Fine, go ahead and handicap it, but don't put them in their own competition. It isn't a large population. It isn't a large number, and it's never going to be. We're not taking over the world. Not everyone's going to be trans or gender diverse, but we're here to stay, and we deserve a place at the table.
This is Lindsay. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Bowers. I also, with your permission, Dr. Bowers, I want to name that using handicapped in that context can, can be used as an ableist term.
Oops, I'm
Is
sorry.
there another term that I can
Yes,
invite
that's a
you
good
to
point.
our understanding? What would you like us to understand in that?
Thank you for modernizing my thinking. Well, we use the term, see, I'm blushing. We use the term, there is a term handicap. It's a handicap in golf, you know, where you're given a certain amount of strokes, but I'm actually embarrassed that I didn't auto-correct on that one.
All in a state
But
of learning.
anyway, okay, we're all in a state of learning, aren't we? I have so many blind spots. It's not funny. It's a wonder I can even change lanes. But the point being is that, you know, what can we do to in sports where there is a decided advantage? Then again, you know, I'm struggling for the words to find that middle ground, but by God, I'll have them for my piece because it's due in a few weeks. So I've got to get it in.
And I got you. If you need a copy of it, I'm here for you.
All right. I love that.
David, somebody had a question directly for you, Father David, of how many other Christian leaders, religious leaders, do you engage with who are actively, outwardly modeling this practice, who are making the spiritual religious space accessible?
Yeah, this is David. That's a great question. As is true with so much of society, there is a great spectrum of thought and participation and ideology that surrounds all of these issues. But there is a growing segment of leadership in religious circles that has these ideas on the front burner and is opening their, that are opening their minds and seeking to embrace the fullness of the diversity of humanity, and to see that not only is that something that we can embrace, it's something that is a natural part of the diversity of what it means to be human, and that leadership needs to be represented in that natural diversity, and that every part of who we are becomes better the more diverse we are, and the more diverse our leadership becomes, because all of our voices come to the table and all of our experience comes to the table. I'm a firm believer that spiritual practice is meant to be done in community, and community is, I think, is at its fullest when it is at its most diverse. And so I would say there are lots, in my denomination, in the Episcopal Church, we are kind of publicly considered to be more of a liberal denomination, which is fine, and maybe that's true. But even in the Episcopal Church, there's a spectrum of belief and practice. I like to say that there's lots of room in the Episcopal Church for diversity, and I think that's true. The UCC is another denomination that is really making headway and inroads into diversity and diverse leadership, and it's a wonderful thing to see. Of course, what always gets the press, and if it bleeds, it leads, is those segments of religious leadership and religious denomination that oppress and that limit and seek to be elitist and gatekeeping and about that. And so, unfortunately, I don't think that that we see as much of that in the press or in the popular eye, because it doesn't get as much attention when people are living together in harmony. But it is there, and it's growing, and that makes me happy. Honestly, I don't think that I would be a part of formal religious, institutional religion if it weren't for the Episcopal Church. Definitely wouldn't be a part, much less a priest.
There is a possibility. There is healing within community. I think we'll end it there today, friends. Thank you, Father David, Dr. Marcy Bowers, River Tesler. Thank you for modeling the work. Thank you for living the work and the practice. Thank you for teaching us, unlearning with us. Thank you to everybody who always joins us each Wednesday of the month to unlearn together. There's something powerful. There's something powerful about an idea that can teach you to even hate your own children and to reject your own children. Oof. So if you're looking at that data, at that information, you're reading it, and it's trying to convince you that it is justifiable to hate your own children, that's a pretty good qualifier in the data right there. We need you out here. We need you out here, DEI champions. Go do the work. See you next month. Bye. How are we feeling? Let's do a check-in. River, David, how did we feel? Anything that felt left unsaid?
No, I think that was great. I don't know. It felt like we got to the core of it. This is River. Huge thank you to the interpreters. Oh my gosh, this is the first panel or event I've got to do with interpreters, and it was just really lovely to see. So apologies for any of the times I didn't hit the This is River. It's a learning experience for me, but this has been so rad, and I'm glad y'all are here. GSBA needs to reach out to y'all, because we definitely could use this for a lot of our like power connects and stuff like that.
It's such a wide-ranging, conversation, and it's adventurous to try to comprise it all in a short amount of time. There could probably, there could be an ongoing conversation like this every week for who knows how long, and we still wouldn't touch everything. But it was really, really refreshing to see this kind of work being done. Super refreshing.
Yeah, I'm so glad you're here, David. It's a big conversation amongst friends. I have a lot of friends that are still like very involved in their faith, and we're really privileged to be in Seattle, where we have a lot of like welcoming churches and stuff like that. I don't know, it's just really beautiful, and like there's this kind of like misunderstanding where a lot of people think that in order to transition they have to renounce their faith to like resolve that cognitive dissonance, but like spirituality is such an important tool for so many people, and it's just, I'm glad you're doing the work that you're doing. It's really powerful to see.
Thank you for saying that. I really appreciate that. In the Deep South, where I pastor a church, it's still a very, very ensconced and enmeshed place for diversity, even in a liberal denomination like the Episcopal Church. But we're seeing some movement, and it's very interesting to be in such a hotly diversified religious environment, because down the street you'll have a church that is vocal and militant about opposing diversity. And so, how is it that we exist in at least nominally the same area of doing faith, and do we even exist in that same universe? And it's one of the things I really have to challenge myself to do is to find ways to have legitimate, non-heated conversations with people. To sit down and put my feet under the same table with someone who feels differently than I do, and to develop a relationship with them, because it's a lot harder to be so impersonal when you get to know someone, and when you have a relationship with someone. And so I hope through that process of getting together with people and having meals and having real hard conversations, that somewhere along the line it gets figured out. It might not be in my generation, but especially in the South. But that's the work.
Yeah, this is River. I'm also from South, was born and raised in a population 200 town in Texas, and raised
Wow.
Baptist. And
Yeah.
it's interesting interacting with my family, my mom and my grandmother, because my mother, when I transitioned, was very like, well, we're just too old to learn. This stuff is hard for us. You'll always be our little boy, and
Mm,
they learned so quick. They picked it up so quick. And it's
mm,
because they know me, right? Like, so many people that are voting against trans, like inclusion and stuff, have never met a trans person in their life, right? And have
yes.
never like humanized or normalized that we're very much just humans with interests and
Mm,
passions, and just trying to move the world the same as our neighbors are. So it's
mm,
cool to see. I think modeling behavior, especially in the South, especially
mhm,
just sitting at the table with somebody, is such a powerful tool.
mm. I had a direct experience with that. My nephew, um, my nephew Liz, transitioned from Luke to
Hmm.
Liz, and it was after a suicide attempt, a jump from the second story of a parking garage while as a freshman in college, and um, Liz's parents are still struggling, but
Hmm.
they embrace Liz because Liz is alive and they know
Mm.
Liz. And there is this beautiful opening up of Liz that we never saw in Luke. And the first time I met Liz was at Christmas Eve dinner at my brother's house. And I left that place and I wept with joy because there was such a beautiful openness, even through the trepidation. There was a beautiful openness that my brother, in his gruff Southern way, was saying, "I would rather have a trans daughter. I would rather have my daughter than no child." And
Mhm.
it was beautiful, and they've still got a long way to go, but I mean,
Sure.
Liz has got an uncle that does, advocacy work, and so she was so excited.
Oh, I bet. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, it was
Oh,
cool.
y'all getting me on like premenstrual time. I'm like about to cry. I always tell the story of it's just so similar because I still to this day joke with my parents, growing up in the Black Christian church, which is still the Black community is
Mm,
on large, extremely homophobic and transphobic, which is so interesting in taking on a colonial version of the God that they worship. And I joke with them, I'm like, it's your fault you taught me to think. They were so adamant about always, questioning, always never taking anything at face value. But my dad, bless him, really wanted me to take this one as, oh, this is what it teaches in church, blah, blah, blah. And we used to have these huge fights. And I went to Christian school and I spent a lot of time in detention fighting with the religious studies teachers on this topic. But then I got to witness my dad's growth in
mm,
this. And a lot of that had to do with two friends who now have well, she's not a baby anymore. But I started to notice when my dad is like in one of those traditional Black fraternities, and they were in their birthing journey. And all of a sudden I start getting emails from all of my like Black uncles in the fraternity sense. And they're all really obsessed with this birthing journey because Betsy was having a couple of miscarriages. And they're like, is Betsy eating kale? I read an article yesterday that kale is really good for, making sure that the the egg attaches in the uterus. And I'm like, who are these men that I grew up with who were so like, it says Adam and Eve, not Adam and Steve, blah, blah, blah. And I said to my dad, I'm like, who are you? This is not the person I grew up with. And he said, in my own practice, my spiritual journey, I have grown to realize that I am a practitioner of Christ's words, not parts of the Bible that were written by other men, and that, as you said, David, historically excluded other books because that was not what was politically going on at the time. And he said, and Christ told me like 10 things, and top of them was to love everybody as he would have loved me. And oh my God, I wept, because to see an old Black man like totally change his worldview. Ooh, ooh. And just in time, because now he has a trans grandchild.
It's amazing.
Mm.
Well, I had a total blast. I don't really have any notes. I think that, you know, we're always going to get more questions than we reasonably have time to address.
Especially for this one. Oh
Yeah.
my goodness. Sorry, this is Laura. Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty wild. I have to hop off for a Pride
too.
Lunch and planning meeting, but hey, thank you for reaching out, Laura. I was so excited to be a last minute addition to this. I had so much fun on the first one, and Lindsay, you do such a good job of facilitating every time. So I'm looking forward to our next little employee learning session when you come into our office. But yeah, thanks for having me. I gotta run, but this was beautiful. Y'all are so great.
Good to meet you, River.
Nice to meet you too, David. Take care, y'all.
Take care, sweetie.
Bye.
And same to all of you. I have to run and go teach a workshop as well at the food bank. But David, I'd love to talk to you. I have this vision of we need to take unlearning on the road. And I'd actually like to start in churches, because I think, at least in the context of the United States of America, how do we help what wants to strangely become a Judeo-Christian society, despite everything that this country was founded on? How do we help those that identify in that way see themselves in anti-racism work, see themselves in LGBTQIA activism, disability activism? And so I'd love to chat with you.
Say the
about
word.
that.
Say the word. That is my language right there. I love it. That's beautiful. And however I could be of help, I would love to be of help. Thank you both for what you do and who you are and what you represent and the light that you bring to people's lives. God bless you, and God keep you. God make his face to shine upon you and give you peace.
Amen.
See you guys. Stay in touch.
Yeah. Hi, everybody.
Thank you,
for
ASL
coming out.
interpreters.
Thank you,
Thanks for
Victor. Thank you,
participating.
Junie.